The day I buried my husband. I thought my world ended. But the real nightmare didn't start until the next morning. His father showed up at my door with mover's cold eyes, smug smile telling me it was over. He said the will left everything to him. That our house, our life, everything we built, now belonged to his family. He thought I was just a broken widow he could crush. But what he didn't know, my husband and I had planned for this exact day. And the secret I was carrying would change everything. This is a story about betrayal, strength, and taking back what's yours. If you've ever had someone try to take advantage of you at your lowest point, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and let's begin. The morning sky was gray, heavy with rain that never fell. Inside the church, the air carried the scent of lilies and loss. She stood near the front, her black dress pressed against her shaking hands, eyes fixed on the coffin that held everything she loved. People moved like shadows, speaking in hushed tones. Every word sounded the same: "I'm sorry for your loss," a phrase that lost meaning after the 50th time. Each condolence slipped past her like smoke. Her husband, Ethan, had been gone only 4 days. 4 days since the accident. 4 days since her world had cracked open. But among the mourners, one group stood apart, not in sorrow but in quiet judgment. Joseph Caldwell, the patriarch, stood tall beside the first pew. His silver hair was combed perfectly, not a sign of grief touched his face. Beside him were his younger son Marcus and Marcus's wife, Brittany, a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a magazine shoot rather than a funeral. Their expressions were blank, polite, rehearsed. When others bowed their heads, they watched. When others prayed, they whispered. It wasn't comfort they sought, it was control. As the pastor spoke, Joseph's gaze never left the widow. It wasn't a look of sympathy. It was appraisal, as though he was taking inventory of what was now his. The widow's fingers tightened around the folded tissue in her hand. She felt that stare like ice on her skin. Part of her wanted to confront him, to scream that Ethan had been hers, not his. But she stayed still, swallowing her anger with her tears. When the final hymn ended, people lined up to offer hugs. Each one felt mechanical. A pat on the back. A whisper of comfort. And behind it all, the same question in every eye. What happens to her now? Joseph finally approached. He didn't touch her hand. He simply leaned close and said quietly, "We'll speak tomorrow. There are family matters to handle." No warmth. No grief. Just business. Then he walked away, gathering Marcus and Brittany like soldiers following a command. Brittany paused long enough to flash a smile, thin, polished, cruel, before slipping on her sunglasses and leaving. When church emptied, silence filled the room like fog. Only the ticking clock above the altar dared to move. The widow remained by the coffin. Her hand rested on the smooth wood, her tears silent now. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. She whispered, almost to herself, "I'll keep my promise, Ethan. I'll protect what we built." But as she looked toward the doorway where Joseph had stood, a cold thought crept in. Would she be allowed to? That night the house felt wrong. Too big. Too quiet. Every sound echoed: the creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind tapping against the windows. She moved through the living room, touching the furniture they'd picked out together, the framed photos that told their story. Ethan's jacket still hung on the back of the chair. His half-read novel lay open on the coffee table. The life they shared still filled every corner, yet it already felt like it belonged to someone else. In the hallway mirror, her reflection looked foreign, the same face but drained of warmth. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. She tried to eat but couldn't. She tried to sleep but woke every hour to the sound of her own heartbeat. When she finally drifted off, the storm outside had grown louder, shaking the old windows in their frames. Morning arrived without color. The storm clouds lingered, turning the sky a dull silver. The widow made coffee out of habit. The smell filled the kitchen, but she couldn't bring herself to drink it. A noise outside caught her attention, the deep rumble of an engine, then voices. She stepped to the window. A large white moving truck sat in the driveway. 3 men in uniforms were unloading dollies and cardboard boxes. At the end of the path, Joseph Caldwell stood with his hands behind his back, talking to the driver as if giving military orders. For a moment she thought it couldn't be real. Not today. Not now. She opened the front door. "Joseph? What's going on?" He turned slowly, his face calm, almost pleased to see her. "Good morning. We're here to take care of the property transition. It's best we handle it quickly. Property transition? She repeated, disbelief sharpening her voice. He nodded. Your husband's will. He left the estate to the family trust. I'm the executor. Everything under his name must return to Caldwell Holdings. That includes the house. Her mouth went dry. My husband would never. Joseph interrupted. It's already done. The paperwork is valid. You'll have time to gather personal belongings. Behind him, Brittany stood near her car, holding a flute of champagne like she was celebrating something. Marcus leaned against the hood, arms folded, avoiding eye contact. Brittany called out, "It's nothing personal, dear. You'll land on your feet." She smiled wide, cruel and effortless. The movers began to enter. Boxes stacked by the door. The sound of footsteps filled the hall that once echoed with laughter. The widow stepped forward. "No one touches anything," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Joseph sighed, pretending patience. "You're making this harder than it has to be. Ethan was a Caldwell. That makes this a Caldwell house." He nodded toward a painting on the wall. Two men lifted it down. Her hands clenched into fists. "You can't do this." He turned his gaze on her, steady and cold. "It's already being done." One of he movers bumped into the shelf by the staircase. A photo frame crashed to the floor. Glass shattered across the hardwood. The widow dropped to her knees, reaching for it. It was their wedding photo, Ethan's smile frozen beneath a web of cracks. Her fingers trembled as she brushed away the shards, slicing her thumb on the edge. A drop of blood fell onto the picture. She didn't flinch. When she looked up, Joseph was watching her again. He said quietly, almost satisfied, "You'll understand soon. It's only business." Then he turned away. Hours passed in chaos. Furniture scraped across floors. Boxes sealed shut with the screech of tape. The widow sat on the staircase, staring blankly at the scene around her. Each piece taken from the house felt like a piece taken from her. She thought of Ethan's laughter, their morning routines, the dreams they had built here, all being erased in a single afternoon. By sunset, the rooms were half empty. The movers left. Joseph handed her a folded document, his signature already at the bottom. "You'll find the legal notices inside. You'll have until the end of the week to relocate." He didn't wait for her response. He simply walked out, leaving the echo of his shoes as his final word. Brittany blew a kiss toward the doorway. "Cheer up, sweetheart. New beginnings." Then she climbed into the car beside Marcus, laughter drifting behind her as they drove away. The house was still gone. Only the faint sound of wind pressed against the windows. She stood alone in the hollow living room. The evening light fell through the blinds in broken lines. Dust floated in the air where furniture used to stand. She looked at the stack of papers Joseph had left. The words blurred through her tears. Her husband's name printed beside Joseph's signature, mocking proof of betrayal. Her chest ached, not just from grief but from anger. How could they plan this? How could they come for her like vultures before the ground over Ethan's grave had even settled? She sank to the floor, the papers slipping from her hands. For the first time since the funeral, she allowed herself to cry freely, no audience, no restraint. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Her tears slowed, replaced by silence. In that silence something shifted. Her breathing steadied. Her eyes opened wider, clearer. They thought she was weak. They thought the widow was easy prey. But they were wrong. Slowly she stood, wiping her face with the back of her hand. The pain was still there, but beneath it was something else, a quiet fire building in her chest. She walked to the mirror again. The same pale face, the same tired eyes. But now there was resolve behind them. "They think they've won," she whispered. Her reflection stared back, unblinking. "They don't know what I'm capable of." The piano music swells, low and haunting. That night, as the rain began again, she didn't sleep. She watched the lightning crawl across the sky and listened to the storm outside. The war had already begun, even if they didn't see it yet. And by the time dawn returned, she had decided one thing: she would not be the victim of the Caldwell family. Not now. Not ever. Morning came slow and gray, like the world itself was still mourning. Rainwater clung to the windows in thin silver lines. The air smelled of damp wood and old flowers. The widow sat at the edge of the bed, the same bed she had shared with her husband. His pillow was still dented from the last night he had slept there. She pressed her hand into the hollow as if the warmth might still be hiding somewhere underneath. She whispered his name once. It came out more like a breath than a word. Then silence again. Downstairs, the house creaked in the wind. Every sound felt alive now. The tick of the clock. The soft groan of floorboards. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded like a reminder that life went on, whether she wanted it to or not. She walked into the kitchen. Half-wilted lilies still crowded the counter, their scent thick and sweet. She poured herself cold coffee from yesterday's pot and stared out the window toward the driveway. The storm had washed everything clean, but the world outside still looked gray and tired. Then she heard it, a low mechanical rumble. At first she thought it was the garbage truck. She set her cup down and stepped closer to the window. 2 large moving trucks rolled up the driveway. Men in gray uniforms climbed out, one after another, moving quickly and with purpose. Then she saw him, Joseph Caldwell, her father-in-law. Standing tall in a dark coat, clipboard in hand, giving orders like he owned the ground he stood on. Her stomach dropped. Marcus, his other son, leaned against a car near the gate, smirking. And beside him stood Brittany, dressed like she was heading to brunch, sunglasses covering half her face, sipping champagne at 10 in the morning. The widow froze for a moment. Her mind struggled to catch up with what she was seeing. Then she walked to the front door, heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. When she opened the door, cold air hit her face. Joseph turned slowly toward her. That same mocking smile he'd worn at the funeral crept across his face. "Morning," he said flatly. "You might want to stand back. The movers need space." She blinked. "Space? For what?" He tilted his head as if explaining something to a child. "We're taking back what belongs to the family. The estate, the furniture, the assets, everything." Her voice trembled. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious." Joseph took a few steps closer. "My son didn't leave a valid will. Without one, the property falls under my supervision until probate clears. Which means this house, these things, they revert to the Caldwell family." Marcus gave a short laugh. "Guess the honeymoon's officially over." Brittany giggled behind her glass. "Some people just don't understand family business." The widow's hands balled into fists. "This is my home. He would never take that from me." Joseph sighed, impatient. "Love doesn't hold weight in legal matters, dear. Only signatures do." He motioned toward the movers. "Start with the living room." The men hesitated for a second, unsure if they were crossing a line. Joseph's sharp glare removed any doubt. They started hauling in boxes, rolling up rugs, pulling photos off the walls. The widow stepped in front of them. "Stop. Get out of my house." Joseph raised an eyebrow. "Don't make a scene." Marcus snorted. "She already is." Brittany wandered inside like she owned the place. "Oh, this space has good bones," she said cheerfully. "With the right touch, it'll look beautiful again." The widow turned toward her. "Get out." Brittany smiled without warmth. "Relax. Joseph just wants to make sure the family's property is handled correctly. You'll get your keepsakes. A few clothes, maybe some jewelry. The rest isn't really yours." The widow's voice shook. "He left this house to me." Joseph laughed, short and bitter. "He left you headaches, not houses. Don't waste my time." A mover bumped into the small table by the stairs. The vase, her grandmother's vase, a pale blue heirloom from her mother's wedding, fell to the floor and shattered into pieces. The sound cut through her like a blade. She dropped to her knees, gathering the fragments. A shard sliced her finger, a thin line of blood blooming across her skin. She didn't even flinch. She just stared at the red drops sliding down the blue glass. Joseph didn't bother to look. It wasn't worth much anyway. She looked up slowly. Her eyes were different now, calm, cold, sharp. "Get out," she said quietly. Joseph smirked. "You don't get to give orders in my house." She stood, glass still in her hand. "Then you shouldn't have come into mine." For a second even Marcus stopped grinning. But Joseph recovered quickly. "Pack your things. I'll send you the paperwork this afternoon. Be gone by the end of the week. If you cooperate, I might let you stay in the guest house until you figure something out." He turned to leave. "Consider that generosity." Brittany followed him out, whispering, "Poor thing. She actually believed she mattered." Marcus lingered just long enough to wink. "Guess you should have married someone richer." Then he was gone too. The door shut. The trucks roared away. The widow stood alone in the wreckage, flowers wilting, glass on the floor, boxes half moved and left open. She sank to her knees again. For a moment all she could do was breathe. Each breath burned, but it steadied her. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. They didn't feel like weakness anymore. They felt like fuel. The house around her looked broken, pictures crooked, drawers pulled out, memories scattered. But she didn't see chaos. She saw proof. Proof that they had underestimated her. She rose slowly, wiping her palms on her skirt. Her heartbeat slowed. Her eyes cleared. Upstairs, her husband's office waited. The door was half open, the way he always left it. She walked in quietly. The smell of his cologne lingered faintly in the air. His desk sat neat and organized, notebooks stacked, pen lying perfectly beside the ledger. She ran her fingers over the wood, tracing the small scratch he once made when signing a deal. She remembered how he'd laughed about it, saying, "Now it's ours for real." Her throat tightened. "Ours," she whispered. "Not theirs." She opened the drawer. Inside were envelopes, documents, and a folder labeled property deed. She pulled it out, unfolded the paper carefully, and stared at the name written across the top. Her name. Not his. Not Joseph's. Hers. The date on it was from before their wedding. Her name stood alone, the rightful owner. The house, the land, everything. Her breath steadied. Her shoulders squared. For the first time since the funeral, she smiled, a small, quiet smile that didn't reach her eyes but carried strength in it. Downstairs, the shards of her grandmother's vase glimmered faintly in the light. She walked over, picked one up, and set it gently on the table. "You thought I was weak," she said softly. "You have no idea who I am." She looked around the house, and took in every inch. The walls, the windows, the creaky stairs. Every piece of it told the story of her life. And she wasn't going to let them rewrite it. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. When the voice on the other end answered, calm and professional, she said, "Chandra, it's me. I need you to look something up for me. Joseph's talking about probate and assets. But I want to know exactly what he thinks he owns." Pause. Then a firm reply, "I'm on it. You hang tight." She ended the call and exhaled slowly. Outside, the last moving truck disappeared down the road. The sky began to clear, sunlight breaking through the gray clouds. The golden light spilled across the floor, catching the edge of the broken glass, making it sparkle. It looked almost beautiful. The widow turned toward the window, eyes fixed on the horizon. Her voice came low and steady, the sound of someone who had stopped crying and started planning. "He took my peace," she whispered. "Now I'll take everything else." The camera would linger on her face, calm, tear-streaked, but no longer afraid. Then it would pull back slowly, showing the quiet strength in the wreckage around her. That was the day the invasion began. But it was also the day the war turned. Because while Joseph Caldwell thought he was taking back the family's empire, what he was really doing was waking something he could never control. And soon he would learn that the woman he tried to break was already 3 moves ahead. Fade to black. The rain had finally stopped. The air outside the Caldwell estate was heavy, soaked with the scent of wet earth and old roses. Inside, the widow sat alone in her husband's old study, surrounded by dust and silence. The storm had passed, but the real one was only beginning. She traced her fingers along the oak desk, the one he had always kept locked. Every drawer was neatly arranged, every document carefully aligned, but one folder sat crooked as if placed in haste. She hesitated before opening it. Her pulse quickened. Inside were letters, faded and brittle, tied with a ribbon that looked older than the ink on the page. At first they seemed ordinary receipts, property records, the usual clutter of a man with too much to hide. But halfway through her hand froze. There it was, a deed. Her husband's signature at the bottom. And beside it, another name. Margaret Caldwell. Her name. She blinked, unsure if she was reading it right. The paper trembled in her hand. The deed transferred ownership of a large portion of the Caldwell estate, including the land beneath their main house, to her, dated 3 months before his death. Yet no one had told her about it. Not the lawyer. Not the family. Not even the will. Her husband had left her the house. Secretly. For a moment the world spun. The whispers of the town, the stares at the funeral, the smug smiles from her in-laws, all of it made sense now. They had tried to erase her. But the paper she held said otherwise. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. The silence of the room wrapped around her like armor. Outside, footsteps echoed on the porch. She slipped the deed inside her coat just before the door creaked open. "Still awake, Margaret?" It was Samuel Caldwell, her husband's older brother. His voice carried that false warmth she had come to dread. She forced a small smile. "Couldn't sleep. Too many memories in this house." He stepped closer, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "You should rest. You've had a hard week. We're handling the paperwork, so there's nothing for you to worry about." The lie hung in the air. She nodded, pretending not to notice his glance at the empty drawer. When he finally left, she locked the door behind him. Her fingers tightened around the hidden deed. That night, she burned a candle beside her husband's photograph. The flame flickered against his smiling face. "You were always one step ahead," she whispered. "But why hide this?" The next morning she walked into town. The streets were still wet, the shopkeepers sweeping puddles from their doorways. She made her way to the notary's office, an old brick building with faded green shutters. Inside, an elderly clerk looked up from his desk. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said softly. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." She placed the deed on his desk. "I found this in my husband's study. I need to know if it's real." The man adjusted his glasses, reading carefully. Minutes stretched into hours. Finally he looked up. "It's genuine," he said. "Registered and sealed. Your husband transferred the property to you quietly, just before his health worsened." Her heart sank. Why would he hide it from everyone? The clerk sighed. Maybe he knew they'd contest it. Maybe he didn't trust them. She left the office with the deed pressed tightly against her chest. The sky above was clear, but she felt the shadow of something larger growing over her. That evening, as the sun bled orange through the windows, the family gathered in the dining room. The long table gleamed with silverware and strained smiles. Samuel sat at the head, speaking like a man already in charge. "Tomorrow we meet with Father's lawyer," he said. "Let's make sure everything goes smoothly." Margaret's eyes stayed on her plate. "Of course," she murmured. When dinner ended, she rose to leave, but Samuel's voice stopped her. "Margaret," he said, "I hope you understand that the estate belongs to the family. It's what he wanted." She met his gaze, calm but cold. "The family," she repeated. "Yes. He made sure of that." He smiled, not catching her meaning. That night she returned to the study again. The house creaked and settled in the dark. She spread the papers across the desk, the will, the deed, the letters. Somewhere among them she felt the truth waiting to be uncovered. As the hours passed, she began to piece it together. There was more than property at stake. The deed was tied to something else, a clause hidden within the legal text. A clause that mentioned a trust, one that redirected the estate's future profits to a name she didn't recognize, Rosemont Foundation. She flipped through the rest of the folder and found a letter addressed to her husband, written in a familiar hand. It was from the lawyer. "Per your instruction, the trust will remain dormant until your wife discovers it. Only then shall it be activated under her control." She sat back, stunned. Her husband had left her not just the house but control of everything the Caldwells owned. The family's wealth, their lands, their name. And he had hidden it under layers of silence, waiting for her to find it. For the first time since his death, she felt power return to her. Quietly, carefully. The next day she returned to the lawyer's office, the same man who had handled the funeral arrangements. He looked startled when she walked in. "I found something," she said, placing the deed and the letter on his desk. His eyes widened as he read. "Where did you?" "In his study," she interrupted. "You told me there was nothing else." He swallowed hard. "I was told not to mention it. Samuel insisted the documents were confidential." Her voice was low. "Confidential from whom?" He didn't answer. She leaned forward, her tone sharpening. "You're going to help me, or I'll make sure everyone knows who's been lying." The lawyer hesitated, then nodded. "There's more. Your husband recorded a final statement, a sealed note meant only for you." He reached into his cabinet and pulled out a small envelope. Her hands shook as she took it. Inside, in her husband's handwriting, were 6 words that changed everything. "Trust no one. Especially my brother." Her breath caught. That night she stood on the balcony overlooking the estate. The stars were hidden behind clouds, but she could feel the shift in the air. The game had changed. Samuel and the others were planning to strip her of everything, but her husband had left her the map to their downfall. She began planning quietly, reaching out to old friends, rebuilding ties she had cut during her marriage. The next week she met with a young journalist from the local paper, one who had once written about the Caldwells' influence over the town's politics. "I think you'll want to see this," she said, sliding the deed and the letter across the table. The journalist's eyes widened. If this is true, the Caldwells could lose everything. Margaret smiled faintly. That's the point. Within days, whispers spread through town again, only this time, not about the widow's grief, but about secrets buried in the Caldwell legacy. Samuel grew restless. He summoned her to his office, slamming the newspaper down on the desk. "What have you done?" he barked. "I only told the truth," she replied calmly. His face turned red. "You think a piece of paper makes you one of us? You'll regret this." She stood, meeting his fury with quiet strength. "I already did. Now it's your turn." The tension between them snapped like glass. From that day on, the house became a battlefield. Servants whispered in corners. Letters disappeared. At night, footsteps echoed in the halls when no one should have been walking. But Margaret was ready. She hid copies of the deed and the letter in 3 different places: the church, the bank, and with the journalist. If anything happened to her, the truth would surface. In the darkness of her room, she looked again at her husband's photo. "You knew they'd come for me," she whispered. "But you left me the weapon." Outside, the wind rose again, bending the trees like shadows bowing to a storm. The widow no longer feared the vultures circling above. She had become one. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of light that made everything in the Caldwell mansion look washed out and tired. Margaret had barely slept. The victory from the night before her husband's deed, the truth finally revealed, still pulsed in her chest. She had held her ground and sent Joseph away furious. But in the quiet that followed, she knew this wasn't over. Men like Joseph didn't accept defeat. They waited for new ways to strike. She poured herself coffee, her hands trembling slightly as the machine hummed. The sound of it filled the empty kitchen, echoing against marble that still smelled faintly of smoke from last night's fire. Her phone buzzed. A message from the funeral director. Payment declined. Her brow furrowed. She opened her banking app. Every account showed red lines and error messages. Account frozen. Transaction declined. At first she thought it was a mistake, maybe a bank error, maybe too many transactions after the funeral. But as she clicked through, her heart started to race. Her joint accounts. Her savings. Even the small personal card she used for groceries, all locked. He called the bank. The wait time stretched endlessly, looping soft piano music that only made her pulse louder. Finally, a voice answered, polite, hesitant. "Mrs. Caldwell? I'm afraid your husband's father filed paperwork as executor of the estate. Probate proceedings have temporarily frozen all connected accounts." Margaret went still. "During the funeral," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. The filing came through yesterday afternoon." Her knees nearly gave way. Joseph had done it while they were still lowering his son into the ground. She hung up slowly, the world narrowing to the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then rage, clean and sharp, replaced the shock. Across town, Joseph Caldwell sat in his leather chair, sipping whiskey even though it was barely noon. Marcus leaned against the wall, grinning. Brittany scrolled through her phone, pretending not to care. "She'll come crawling soon enough," Joseph muttered. "She's got the house, sure. But houses don't pay bills." Marcus laughed. "You really froze everything?" "Every cent. Every line of credit. Even her cards tied to the trust." Joseph's smile was thin. "She'll be begging by the end of the week." Back in the house, Margaret walked to her husband's office. The air still smelled faintly like him, cedarwood, coffee, and the pages of old books. She sat down, trying to steady herself. Her husband had been clever. She knew that. He planned ahead for everything: the trust, the will, the way he hid that first deed. But she also knew Joseph had been playing this game for decades. "Not this time," she whispered. She opened his files. The room fell into the quiet hum of memory, the faint creak of the desk, the whisper of paper sliding across wood. And then she found it, an old notebook labeled "Emergency." Inside were handwritten notes, each one neat and deliberate. Names of accounts. Alternate numbers. Lawyers she'd never heard of. And at the bottom one line that stopped her breath. If Joseph moves first, call Chandra. Don't panic. Her lawyer. Her friend. The one person she could trust. Margaret grabbed her keys and left the house. Rain began to fall again, not a storm this time, but a slow, cold drizzle that blurred the windshield as she drove. Chandra's office was warm, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and old leather. Chandra looked up the moment Margaret stepped in, her sharp eyes scanning Margaret's pale face. He did it, didn't he? She said flatly. Margaret nodded, her voice hoarse. He froze everything. Even the trust-linked accounts. Chandra's jaw tightened. He can't touch the trust itself, not legally. But if he's pretending to be executor, he can cause chaos until the court notices. It's a dirty trick, but one that buys him time. Margaret sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. He wants to break me. He thinks if he takes away everything, I'll just give up. Chandra leaned forward. Then we make sure he learns what happens when he underestimates you. They spent hours digging through paperwork, cross-checking files, calling the bank's legal department. Every move Joseph made had been carefully timed, using the confusion after the funeral to manipulate the system. Chandra finally looked up. He filed false documents claiming your husband's final will was invalid. We'll challenge it, but it'll take a few days. Meanwhile, I can unfreeze one personal account, the one you opened before marriage. Margaret's lips parted. The one in my maiden name? Chandra nodded. Exactly. It's not tied to the estate. It's yours alone. Relief washed over her, not because of the money, but because it meant she wasn't entirely trapped. Chandra handed her a folder. You'll have access by morning. Use it wisely. He'll assume you're powerless, let him. Margaret left the office as the sky cleared. The sun broke through gray clouds, lighting the wet streets in streaks of gold. Inside Joseph's mansion, the mood had changed. He was confident again, almost smug. Marcus tossed a newspaper onto the table. Words out. The estate's in dispute. Everyone thinks she's broke. Brittany smiled thinly. Good. Maybe she'll sell that house and crawl back where she belongs. Joseph raised his glass. To family order restored. But across town, Margaret sat by her fireplace, staring at her husband's notebook. Her fingers traced the handwriting, the small loops and firm strokes that once steadied her heart. He had known this would happen. He had known his father's greed. Every note, every backup plan, every trust document had been built for this moment. Margaret smiled, not from joy but from a calm, dangerous clarity. You think you've won, Joseph, she murmured. But you've only shown me exactly where to strike. She picked up her phone and dialed Chandra again. Let's talk about the next move. That night, Margaret spread the papers across the dining table. The fireplace threw long shadows over columns of numbers and account names. The quiet hum of the clock was the only sound in the room. She could almost feel her husband beside her again, steady and patient, the way he always was when a problem needed solving. She whispered, "You told me to be ready." Her phone buzzed. A new email from Chandra blinked at the top of the screen, copies of the probate filings Joseph had submitted. Each page was stamped "Executed under emergency clause." The man had even used the date of the funeral service as his filing time. Margaret's jaw tightened. He wanted to bury more than a son. He wanted to bury her future. She took a breath and began to plan. For hours she wrote notes, circled names, highlighted statements. By morning, a clear path began to appear between the chaos. Every false document Joseph had filed, every bank officer he had manipulated, every loophole he had exploited. All she needed was patience and evidence. When dawn came, she was still at the table. Her phone rang again. "Chandra, I've got something," her friend said. "The bank manager who approved the freeze, he's one of Joseph's old golf buddies. I can prove conflict of interest." Margaret straightened. "So we can challenge the freeze directly?" "Yes. And if we do it publicly, the bank's lawyers will panic. They can't afford a lawsuit that looks like favoritism." Margaret smiled, slow and certain. "Then let's make them panic." By midday, Joseph's mansion buzzed its self-satisfaction. Brittany laughed at the sight of a gossip headline on her phone. "Caldwell widow faces financial scandal." Marcus poured champagne. But Joseph's secretary stepped into the room holding a tablet. "Sir, the bank just received a subpoena request from Mrs. Caldwell's attorney." Joseph froze. "Eh, what?" She's demanding an emergency hearing, alleging fraud and misuse of authority. For the first time since the funeral, Joseph felt his control slip. At the courthouse the next morning, marble flues echoed under Margaret's heels. Reporters whispered. Chandra walked beside her, calm and ready. Inside the small chamber, the judge adjusted her glasses. This request was filed under emergency motion. Mrs. Caldwell, you claim Mr. Caldwell Sr. unlawfully froze assets belonging to the estate. Chandra spoke firmly. Yes, Your Honor. He filed executor paperwork before probate was even opened. He presented an outdated will, omitting an irrevocable trust that already holds the estate's assets. We have documentation showing he coordinated with a bank manager to suspend my client's access without cause. Joseph's lawyer protested, but Margaret barely heard him. She watched Joseph's face across the room, his eyes hard, his jaw clenching each time a document slid across the judge's desk. When the bank manager was called to speak, he stammered. I acted on Mr. Caldwell's request. I believed he had authority. You believed wrong, the judge cut in. Accounts connected to Mrs. Caldwell's trust are to be restored immediately. Any further interference will result in penalties. Joseph's lawyer tried to object again, but the judge banged her gavel once. Enough. The sound echoed like thunder. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Margaret didn't answer any of them. She simply walked past Joseph, pausing for a second. You should have read the trust papers before you touched them, she said quietly. Then she kept walking. That evening Joseph paced H's study. She humiliated me in front of everyone, he growled. That woman doesn't know who she's dealing with. Marcus spoke softly. Maybe we should just... Silence. Joseph roared. His voice shook the room. He turned to the window, watching the lights of the city flicker. If she wants a war, she'll get one. But even as he said it, a small seed of fear had taken root. For the first time he realized his opponent wasn't some grieving widow. She was the heir to his son's strategy, and she was learning fast. Meanwhile, Margaret sat by the window of her own home, the one she had almost lost. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and the slow crackle of the fire. She held a letter Chandra had sent with the official confirmation. All accounts reinstated. For the first time since the funeral, she felt something close to peace. Not victory yet, just steady ground. She opened her husband's notebook again and found another short line she had overlooked before. If he takes from you, make him see what he's already lost. The words hit her with new meaning. She realized this was not only about money. It was about legacy, about respect, about showing Joseph that cruelty could not rewrite truth. Margaret reached for her laptop. She began compiling every document tied to the Caldwell business empire: property records, shareholder agreements, debt schedules. She didn't know yet what she would find, but she could feel there was more. Something hidden. Something her husband had never spoken of. The hours passed quietly. The night deepened. And as the first light of morning touched the curtains, she saw a digital folder appear in one of the archives she had opened by chance. Its title was simple: Leverage. Her pulse quickened. She clicked once. Files began to open: ledgers, contracts, confidential agreements. And at the very bottom, a single video file. Her husband's face filled the screen, smiling gently, his voice calm. If you're seeing this, it means he tried to destroy you, he said. You'll find everything you need in this folder. It's time for you to take back what's yours. Margaret sat frozen, tears in her eyes. The storm outside was gone. In its place, a quiet sunrise. She closed the laptop slowly, determination hardening her expression. Thank you, she whispered. Now it's my turn. The morning sun cut through the blinds in narrow bands of gold, sliding across the papers that still covered Margaret's table. She hadn't slept. The faint scent of coffee hung in the air, cold now, forgotten hours ago. Her eyes were dry but clear. She had spent the night replaying her husband's video, memorizing every word, every pause, every hint of the plan he'd left behind. When Chandra arrived, she barely knocked. You look like you've been up for days, she said, dropping her briefcase beside the table. Margaret smiled faintly. Feels like I've been up for years. Chandra pulled out a chair and Saturday. All right. Tell me what you found. Margaret turned the laptop toward her. The folder named Leverage sat open. a collection of documents organized in neat precision. He owned them, she said quietly. Every debt, every loan, every piece of paper that kept Joseph's company alive, it was all under his control. Or, now it's under mine. Chandra scanned the files, her eyes narrowing. This is bigger than I thought. He wasn't just protecting you, he was dismantling Joseph's power one document at a time. Margaret nodded. And he left me the key. She tapped the folder. But that's not all. There's something else. Something about the trust he set up before he died. I think it's connected. Chandra opened her case and pulled out a thick envelope. You're right. I've been looking into the updated estate filings. He moved almost everything into an irrevocable family trust about 6 months before he passed. I don't think Joseph even knew it existed. Margaret leaned forward. Irrevocable means they can't touch it, right? Chandra smiled. Exactly. Once it's formed, not even the creator can alter it without the trustee's approval. And guess who he made trustee? Margaret stared at her. Me. Congratulations, Chandra said softly. You're holding the entire legacy in your hands. For a long time neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock. Margaret's chest rose slowly as the truth sank in. Everything Joseph had stolen, everything he believed he controlled, was nothing but an illusion. The real power, the future of the Caldwell name, was already beyond his reach. But why hide it? Margaret asked finally. Why not tell me outright? Chandra's tone softened. Maybe he knew how dangerous Joseph could be. Maybe he wanted to keep you safe until the right time. Margaret rubbed her temples, exhaustion mixing with relief. He always said Joseph would never stop fighting for control. I thought he meant emotionally. I didn't realize he meant this literally. Chandra took a deep breath and spread the papers out across the table. This trust isn't just a document, it's a fortress. Look here. He pointed to the clauses. He built in multiple protections. If anyone tries to contest it, they automatically forfeit any claim to the estate. If Joseph files a lawsuit, he loses his standing as beneficiary. Margaret blinked. He made sure greed would destroy itself. Exactly. A small laugh escaped her throat. It wasn't joyful, not yet, but it was the first sound of hope she had made in days. So what's our next move? She asked. Chandra glanced at her watch. We show him the truth. But first we prepare. Once he sees this, he'll come at you harder than ever. We'll need documentation, witnesses, and someone at the bank who's willing to speak. Margaret nodded. I already have an idea who can help. By noon, the two women sat in the office of Arold Banks, the same manager who had helped Joseph freeze her accounts. His face was pale, his tie slightly askew. I didn't mean any harm, Mrs. Caldwell, he said nervously. Mr. Caldwell Sr. told me he was the executor. And you didn't verify? Chandra's voice cut through the air. He shifted uncomfortably. He's a major client. Margaret's eyes didn't waver. You froze a widow's accounts in the middle of her husband's funeral, she said quietly. You think that's something people forget? He swallowed. What do you want from me? The truth, she replied. And your signature. She slid a document across the desk, an affidavit confirming that Joseph had pressured him into taking action without legal authority. He hesitated, glancing between them. If I sign this, he'll ruin me. Margaret leaned closer. If you don't, the state will. Fraud, collusion, abuse of power. You think the bank will take that lightly? At least this way you walk out clean. For a moment the man's fingers trembled above the paper. Then he picked up the pen and signed. Margaret folded the document, slipped it into her folder and stood. Thank you. That's all we needed. Outside the air felt lighter. The city hummed around them, car horns, distant sirens, life moving forward. Margaret looked up at the tall glass buildings reflecting the sky and said, He's going to hate this. Chandra smiled. Good. Let him. They walked toward the courthouse. It was time to file the trust papers officially and end Joseph's illusion of control once and for all. Inside the records office, the clerk reviewed the documents carefully. Everything looks in order. Once this is entered into the system, the probate case Joseph Caldwell filed will be void. The assets are already assigned to the trust, which means there's nothing for the court to divide. Margaret exhaled slowly. So all his scheming was for nothing. Less than nothing, Chandra said. He just exposed himself publicly for trying to steal from a legal trust. As the clerk stamped the final page, a wave of relief washed through her. But deep down she knew Joseph wouldn't stop. Men like him never did. That evening, Margaret sat alone on her porch, watching the sun slip below the horizon. The air smelled faintly of rain. Somewhere in the distance a train horn echoed, low and mournful. She held her husband's watch in her hand, the one he'd worn every day until the end. "I think I understand now," she whispered. "You were building a wall around us. A future no one could break." Her phone buzzed again. A new message from an unknown number. "You think you've won? We'll see about that." He stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. There was no fear left in her. Only purpose. Inside, she placed the signed affidavit beside the trust papers. Her husband's video played quietly in the background again, his voice warm and steady. "You don't have to fight them with rage. Fight them with truth. It lasts longer." Margaret closed her eyes and listened to his words. Then she opened her notebook and wrote the plan for the next day. It was time to bring Joseph into the open, to make him see what he'd really lost. Morning sea heavy with gray clouds. The meeting was set at the main branch of the bank, the same one Joseph had used for decades. The conference room was sleek and sterile, glass walls and chrome edges reflecting every tension in the air. Joseph sat at one end of the table, a smirk on his face. Brittany sat beside him, her phone recording discreetly. "I'm glad you came," Joseph said, his voice dripping with mock courtesy. "Maybe we can settle this quietly. You've embarrassed the family enough." Margaret didn't answer. She placed a folder on the table. "You're right. Let's settle it." Chandra handed copies of the trust documents to everyone present, including the bank's legal representative. "This," she said clearly, "is the irrevocable Caldwell Family Trust. Filed and active since March last year. Mr. Caldwell Sr., you are not a beneficiary. You are, however, listed as a former creditor since your personal loans from the company were forgiven under Clause 14. Joseph blinked. "That's impossible." "Check the signatures," Chandra said. "Your son's and yours. Both notarized." The bank's representative frowned, flipping through the pages. "This means the estate under probate has no assets." Brittany leaned forward. "So what, she gets everything? This housewife?" Margaret looked directly at her. "I earned the house before I ever married into your family. Everything else your husband's father built, I protected when he couldn't." Joseph's voice rose. "You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind against his own family." "No," Margaret said softly. "You did that yourself." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then the bank's lawyer spoke. "Mr. Caldwell, under this trust, you have no authority to represent the estate or any associated account. Any further attempt to do so will result in legal action." Joseph's face reddened. "You can't do this to me. I am Caldwell Enterprises." Margaret stood, her expression calm. "No, Joseph. You were. Now the Caldwell name belongs to the future. And that future starts today." She gathered her papers and left the room. Cameras flashed as she exited the building, but she didn't stop. Chandra walked beside her, her hand firm on Margaret's shoulder. "That's it," Chandra said. "It's over." Margaret shook her head gently. "Not yet. He's not finished. And neither am I." That night, Joseph poured himself a glass of whiskey, hands trembling. The empire he had built on intimidation and deceit was slipping through his fingers. Brittany watched him from the doorway. "What are we going to do?" she asked. Joseph didn't answer. He just stared out the window into the darkness, his reflection fractured across the glass. Somewhere across town, Margaret sat at her desk, reviewing the last document from the leverage folder. Her husband's handwriting filled the margin. "When the time comes, use this. It will free you completely." She smiled faintly. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow it ends." The next morning the city felt sharper. Cold wind slipped between the tall buildings, carrying the smell of rain and gasoline. Margaret stood outside the main headquarters of Caldwell Enterprises, the place Joseph had ruled like a kingdom. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass door's tired eyes, but steady ones. She tightened her coat, adjusted the folder in her hands and walked in. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and expensive ego. The receptionist's smile faded the moment she recognized her. Mrs. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell Sr. is already in the conference room. I know, Margaret said, her voice calm. He's waiting for me. She walked through the long hallway lined with portraits, men in suits, all proud, all carrying the same last name. But none of them, she thought, ever earned it the way her husband did. When she entered the room, Joseph was already sitting at the far end of the table. Brittany was beside him, her manicured fingers scrolling through her phone. Marcus sat near the corner, pretending not to be part of the drama, but his restless eyes gave him away. Across from them sat Chandra, already unpacking her files, her expression composed and sharp. Well, Joseph said, leaning back, the widow arrives. Shall we begin this little show of yours? Margaret sat down quietly. It's not a show, Joseph. It's closure. He laughed, a hard, cruel sound. Closure? You're about to lose everything. The bank called me this morning. They're reviewing your access again. Seems like they're not convinced you're the rightful owner. Chandra smiled thinly. That's interesting, considering the bank doesn't have that authority anymore. Joseph frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Before Chandra could speak, the door opened. Two people entered, the bank's senior attorney, Mr. Holloway, and the branch director, Ms. Ramirez. They both carried heavy folders and looked distinctly uncomfortable. Thank you for meeting us on short notice, Chandra said smoothly. Shall we get started? Joseph leaned forward, trying to regain control. Let's make this quick. Mrs. Caldwell has been misrepresenting her authority over my late son's estate. I have here the original will, naming me executor. Ms. Ramirez interrupted. Mr. Caldwell, we've reviewed your filings. The document you submitted is invalid. Your son's estate was transferred into an irrevocable family trust 6 months before his death. Joseph blinked. That's impossible. No, Chandra said quietly. It's binding. Margaret opened her folder and slid a set of papers across the table. This is the trust deed verified by the court yesterday. My husband made me the sole trustee and beneficiary. That means every account, every share, every property attached to his name is under my management. You don't own a cent. The silence that followed was electric. Brittany's face paled. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Joseph's jaw twitched. You forged that. The signatures are notarized, Ms. Ramirez replied before Chandra could speak. We checked them against state records. They're genuine. Furthermore, Mr. Caldwell, it appears you filed to freeze accounts that were not legally part of the estate. The attorney slid another paper toward him. That's fraud. Joseph's eyes darted between them. You think you can accuse me of fraud? I'm the head of this family. Margaret leaned forward, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. No, Joseph. You're the head of nothing. You tried to strip me of everything I had. You humiliated me. You thought grief would make me weak. But you forgot something. My husband and I built this life together. And we protected it together. Brittany's voice trembled. This can't be happening. Chandra clasped her hands. Oh, it's happening. And it gets better. Under state law, any attempt to interfere with a trust or its trustee can result in criminal penalties. The bank has already notified regulators. Ms. Ramirez nodded. Effective immediately, all accounts are restored to Mrs. Caldwell's sole control. And Mr. Caldwell, your accounts with our bank are being closed pending investigation. Joseph shot to his feet. You can't do this to me. Margaret stood too. You did it to yourself. For a long moment no one spoke. Joseph's face turned red, his breathing shallow. Brittany reached for his arm, but he pulled away, his pride burning hotter than his fear. You think this is over? He hissed. You've made an enemy you can't handle. Margaret didn't flinch. You already lost, Joseph. You just haven't realized it yet. Outside, the sky had turned silver. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, drumming on the pavement. Margaret and Chandra stood under the awning, watching cars splash by. Chandra turned to her. That was one of the cleanest takedowns I've ever seen. Margaret gave a tired smile. It wasn't about taking him down. It was about taking back my life. They walked toward the car in silence. When they reached the corner, Margaret stopped. Across the street, Joseph stood in the rain, his coat soaked, his eyes hollow. For a second he looked like an old man, broken, lost, smaller than she'd ever seen him. But when their eyes met, there was still a flicker of hatred there. He raised his hand slowly, pointing at her as if making a promise. Then he turned and disappeared into the rain. That night, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. The storm outside rattled the windows. She stared at the pile of documents in front of her: trust papers, affidavits, letters from the court. And for the first time the weight began to lift. Her husband's voice echoed in her mind from that video. You don't win by fighting like them. You win by standing longer. She touched the screen of her phone, replaying the moment his face appeared, his soft smile frozen in time. I did it, she whispered. I stood long enough. A knock at the door broke the quiet. She hesitated, then opened it. Marcus stood there, drenched from the rain, hands shaking. Margaret, please, he said. I didn't know what he was going to do. I tried to stop him. She studied him for a long moment. His eyes were red, his voice cracked. He looked nothing like the smug man from the funeral. Why are you here? She asked. He's losing it, Marcus said. He's going to destroy everything. He's already moving money out of the company. He's desperate. Margaret sighed. Then he's digging his own grave. I thought you should know, he said quietly. And, I'm sorry. She didn't answer. She closed the door gently, leaving him standing in the rain. Later that night she sat with Chandra again, papers spread out between them. He's trying to move assets, Margaret said. Marcus confirmed it. Chandra nodded. Let him. The trust has clauses that revert any transfers made under duress. Whatever he touches you'll get back. Margaret smiled faintly. You sound so sure. I am sure, Chandra said. Because your husband was smarter than all of them combined. Margaret leaned back in her chair. He was. And now I finally understand why he never let me sign things blindly. He was training me for this. They sat in silence for a moment. The storm outside had softened to a steady drizzle. The air smelled of wet earth and hope. The next morning news broke. The headlines were everywhere, on phones, on TV, across social media. Reporters stood outside the gates of Joseph's mansion. Cameras flashed. Voices shouted questions. The once powerful patriarch of the Caldwell family was now the face of greed and deceit. Margaret watched the coverage in quiet disbelief. Not joy, just closure. He had built his empire on the illusion of control, and now that illusion had turned to dust. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but curiosity won. A message flashed on the screen. You'll regret this. No name. No number. She smiled sadly. Still fighting ghosts, she whispered and deleted it. Later that day, Margaret returned to the office her husband once worked in. The door creaked open, releasing the faint scent of paper and coffee. Sunlight poured across the old desk, where she found one more sealed envelope in his handwriting. She opened it with trembling fingers. If you're reading this, you've survived the storm. The next part is about peace, not revenge. Take what's left and build something better. Make the Caldwell name mean something again. Not money. Not pride. Just truth. Tears filled her eyes. She folded the letter gently and placed it in the top drawer. When she walked out of the office, she didn't look back. Meanwhile, across town, Jove sat in his darkened study, the whiskey glass untouched beside him. The television blared with news of his downfall. Brittany paced in front of him, furious. Do something, she snapped. We can't lose everything. He didn't move. His voice was low, hollow. It's already gone. She stared at him, disgusted. You're pathetic. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Joseph stared at the empty room. For the first time he realized the empire he built had never been his. It had always belonged to the son he'd tried to control. And now it belonged to the woman he'd underestimated. He raised his glass in the air to no one in particular and muttered, You win, girl. Back at home, Margaret sat near the fireplace, the flames soft and golden. The house was quiet, finally free of the tension that had haunted it for weeks. She closed her eyes and let the warmth wash over her. She had won not through hate but through patience, truth, and love. And though the battle had left scars, it also gave her something precious. Freedom. The trust was safe. The company was hers. The future finally was her own. She looked at the portrait of her husband on the wall and smiled softly. We did it, she whispered. And I'm not done yet. When the noise of the world finally died down, the silence started to speak. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the refrigerator, it all sounded like a reminder of what was lost. But grief has a strange way of turning into purpose when you have nowhere else to go. Margaret walks into her husband's office. The room smells faintly of cedar and coffee, exactly like him. The chair is still slightly turned as if he might walk back in any second. Her fingers brush the edge of the desk. She sits. For a moment she just breathes. Then she opens the laptop. It greets her with a login screen, his name, his world. The password comes easily. Birthdays, anniversaries, dates they promised never to forget. The screen lights up, flooding the dark room in pale blue. Folders. Dozens of them. Business files, invoices, legal drafts. She scrolls, eyes scanning faster with every flick of the mouse wheel. Then she stops. One folder sits alone at the bottom of the desktop. Name, leverage. Margaret's breath catches. Her husband never named things dramatically. He was practical, careful, understated. This was deliberate. She double-clicks. Inside there are subfolders. Numbers, contracts, scans of bank statements, corporate ownership documents. And one video file. The thumbnail shows his face. She hesitates, trembling, and then presses play. Her husband appears on screen, sitting in this very same office. The light is dim but his expression is calm. His eyes look directly into the camera. Husband, if you're watching this, it means Joseph finally showed his true colors. And it means I didn't have time to stop him myself. He leans forward slightly. I know what he's capable of, Margaret. I've known since I was a boy. Every favor he gave came with a price. Every dollar was a leash. But I made a promise, to protect you even after I was gone. He exhales softly, a mixture of regret and resolve. Over the past few years I bought out every debt his company owed. Quietly. Through a holding company, J Holdings LLC. You'll find the documents in this folder. He thought the banks forgave his loans. They didn't. I did. And now, you own him. Completely. Use it if you have to. Use it to make sure he never hurts you again. And Margaret, don't feel guilty. You didn't take anything from him. You're just reclaiming what he stole from everyone else. He smiles faintly, eyes softening. You were always stronger than you thought. I'm just sorry I won't be there to see you prove it. Margaret sits frozen, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The glow from the screen reflects in her eyes, grief mixing with something sharper, something alive. She rewinds and plays the last words again. You own him. Her hand trembles but her voice doesn't. Margaret whispering, hey love, let's finish this. She opens the documents. One by one she realizes what he's done. Every loan, every line of credit, every bailout Joseph ever bragged about, all of it had come from her husband's silent hand. The old man's company was built on money he no longer owned. His empire stood on sand and she now held the tide. Cut to montage. Margaret printing documents, signing papers, sealing envelopes. Her quiet grief turns into quiet purpose. She meets with Chandra the next morning. The lawyer looks at the files spread across the desk in stunned silence. Chandra, you're telling me your husband owned every debt Joseph's company ever took? Margaret, not him. Me. No. Chandra blinks, then lets out a low whistle. Chandra. Margaret, this isn't leverage. This is checkmate. Margaret, he thought taking my home would break me. He thought freezing my accounts would bury me. But he never realized he was already standing on my land. Chandra laughs quietly, shaking her head in disbelief. Chandra, do you want me to file foreclosure notices? Margaret, not yet. I want to see him squirm first. Cut to Joseph's office. Stiff, sterile, lined with awards from decades past. Joseph sits with Marcus and Brittany, their faces tense. The phone rings. Joseph, who the hell is calling me at 8 a.m.? He answers and his face changes. His hand tightens around the receiver. Bank officer on phone. Mr. Langford, this is a courtesy call. Your company has defaulted on several notes owned by J Holdings LLC. We're obligated to inform you the loans are being called in full. Joseph, what the hell are you talking about? J Holdings. Who? But the line clicks dead. He stares at the phone. Marcus shifts uncomfortably. Marcus. Dad, what's going on? Joseph stands slowly, rage building in his chest. Joseph. Someone's playing games with me. Find out who owns that company, now. Meanwhile, Margaret sits in her car outside the bank, watching the morning sun rise. Her reflection in the windshield looks calm, almost serene. It's strange how power doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with silence. Paperwork, signatures, the quiet shifting of balance from one hand to another. Her phone buzzes. A message from Chandra. He knows. Check your email. The response is priceless. Margaret opens her inbox. Attached is a scan of a furious letter from Joseph's company. Threats of legal action, accusations of fraud. At the bottom, signed by Joseph himself, the man who once called her nothing but a guest in this family. She smiles. Margaret, to herself. Guess no more. That evening she walks into the nursery, still half-painted, quiet, untouched. She looks around and whispers softly to the empty room. Margaret, your father wanted you to have peace. So we're taking it back piece by piece. Cut to her laptop screen showing the foreclosure notice draft. The cursor blinks over the send button. Her finger hovers. She closes her eyes. In that moment she hears his voice again. The man she loved telling her she was stronger than she thought. She clicks. Some people think revenge is about rage. About shouting and breaking things. But real revenge, the kind that lasts, is calm. It's paperwork done in silence. It's truth revealed in daylight. It's the moment when the ones who took everything realize they never had control at all. Cut to Joseph pacing in his office. His phone rings again, this time from his lawyer. Lawyer on phone. Joseph, I just got the filings. You're done. Whoever owns J Holdings holds every note. They can shut you down in 48 hours. Joseph's voice shakes. Joseph. Who is it? Who owns it? A long pause. Lawyer. It's your daughter-in-law. Joseph drops the phone. His face drains of color. Scene fades back to Margaret's house. The night is quiet again. She sits by the window, sipping tea, staring at the city lights in the distance. He thought he'd buried me in grief. But grief was the soil my strength grew from. She closes her laptop, the leverage folder now empty, every document used, every secret revealed. Margaret softly. Rest now, love. It's done. Morning light breaks through gray clouds. The city hums quietly. Inside her house, Margaret stands in front of the mirror, buttoning a sharp black blazer. Her eyes look calm, but her reflection carries the weight of every battle she's fought. Every war has a moment when the noise stops. When the dust settles and you see exactly what's left standing. For Joseph, that moment was coming faster than he ever imagined. Margaret slips a folder into her leather bag. Inside it are the foreclosure documents. Every signature in place. Every number correct. Everything her husband built, now ready to return to its rightful hands. Her phone buzzes. A message from Chandra. He called. He's desperate. Asked for a meeting. You ready? Margaret types back one word. Always. Cut to Jofa's office. The once grand room is half empty, boxes stacked near the wall. The air smells like dust and panic. Joseph sits behind his desk, eyes red, papers scattered everywhere. Marcus stands nearby, pacing. Brittany scrolls on her phone, her expression distant and irritated. Joseph. She thinks she can destroy me with paperwork? That woman. After everything I did for this family? Brittany, without looking up. Maybe if you hadn't transferred everything into her husband's name, this wouldn't be happening. Joseph slams his hand against the desk. Joseph. Watch your mouth. Marcus finally stops pacing. Marcus. Dad yelling won't fix this. We need a deal. A settlement. Something. She's not bluffing. Joseph glares at him. Joseph. She won't dare show her face here. Marcus hesitates. Marcus. She already agreed to meet. Noon. Joseph's jaw tightens. Joseph. Then let her come. Let her see what happens when you challenge the blood of this family. The sky is heavy with the threat of rain. Margaret's car pulls up to the office building that once symbolized her father-in-law's power. Now it looks smaller, older, worn. She steps out, heels clicking against the marble floor as she walks inside. Chandra waits in the lobby holding a file. Chandra. You don't have to go in there alone. Margaret. I do. This started as family business. It ends that way too. Chandra nods slowly. Chandra. Call me when it's done. Margaret straightens her blazer, takes a breath, and pushes open the door to Joseph's office. Margaret. Good afternoon. Joseph looks up, his face tight with anger and something close to fear. Joseph. You've made quite the mess, Margaret. You've embarrassed this family in public. You've dragged our name through court filings and gossip. You think this is victory? Margaret calmly. Oh, this is truth. And truth always comes with a cost. Brittany mocking. Oh, how noble. You came all this way to lecture us? Margaret. Oh, I came to collect. She sets the folder down on the desk. The soft sound of paper hitting wood feels like a gunshot. Margaret. Those are foreclosure notices for every property under Langford Holdings. Effective immediately. J Holdings, my company, owns the debt. You defaulted. And as of Friday, you lose everything. Joseph stares at her, disbelief twisting into rage. Joseph. You can't do this. You're nothing. You married into this family, you didn't build it. Margaret leans forward slightly, her voice calm but sharp as glass. Margaret. I didn't build your empire, Joseph. I built the one that owns it. Brittany laughs bitterly. Brittany. You think this makes you some kind of queen? You'll be hated by everyone. Even your husband would have never. Margaret cuts her off. Margaret. My husband did this. Every paper you signed, every loan you thought came from your precious investors. It was him. He bought you out quietly, piece by piece. He just made sure I'd hold the reins when he was gone. The room goes still. Marcus looks down, whispering almost to himself. Marcus. He knew, all along. Joseph's voice cracks with fury. Joseph. He betrayed his own father for you? Margaret's eyes glisten, but her tone stays steady. Margaret. Oh. He protected his wife from a man who only ever saw family as property. He knew you'd try to destroy me the moment he was gone. And he made sure you couldn't. Joseph rises suddenly, slamming his fists on the desk. Joseph. You think this ends with paperwork? You'll regret this. I'll fight you in court till my last breath. Margaret softly. Then you'd better start preparing your last breath. He freezes, staring at her. Her calmness unnerves him more than any shouting ever could. Margaret. The banks are done with you. Your board has resigned. Your employees already know what's coming. And I'm not here for revenge, Joseph. I'm here for peace. Something you never gave anyone. She turns to leave. Brittany scoffs. Brittany. Peace. You're about to bankrupt a man in his 70s. You call that peace? Margaret stops at the door and looks back, her voice low and steady. Margaret. Peace doesn't always mean mercy. She walks out, leaving the three of them in silence. Cut to Joseph later that evening, alone in his office. The rain pounds against the window. Papers lie scattered everywhere. The phone rings endlessly. He doesn't answer. The door opens, Marcus enters, soaked from the storm. Marcus. The bank froze our accounts. They're shutting everything down. It's over. Joseph doesn't look up. Joseph. Get out. Marcus. Dad, listen. Joseph shouting. Get out. Marcus hesitates, then leaves, slamming the door behind him. Joseph sits in darkness, clutching a whiskey glass. His hand trembles. He mutters to himself. Joseph. All for a woman who didn't even carry my blood. Cut to Margaret's home later that night. The storm rages outside. She sits in the living room holding a letter from her lawyer. Chandra's note reads, filed. It's done. She exhales, eyes heavy with exhaustion and relief. Sometimes victory doesn't feel like celebration. Sometimes it just feels like quiet. Like breathing again after being underwater too long. She looks around the house. The walls, the furniture, the photos, they're not just things anymore. They're survival. Proof that she endured. A soft knock breaks the silence. She opens the door to find Marcus standing there, drenched and broken. Margaret. You shouldn't be here. Marcus. I know. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. She studies him carefully. He looks nothing like the smug man from the funeral. Marcus. He's lost everything. And he still blames you. But, you didn't ruin him. He did that himself. Margaret nods slowly. Margaret. Thank you for saying that. Marcus. What are you going to do now? She glances toward the staircase where a small light glows from the nursery. Margaret. Build something worth leaving behind. Marcus follows her gaze. His expression softens. Marcus. Is it true? About the baby? Margaret smiles faintly. Margaret. Yes. And this time the legacy stays where it belongs. Scene shift. Cepha's mansion now dark and empty. Movers carry out boxes. The grand staircase that once symbolized power now echoes with footsteps of loss. A foreclosure notice hangs on the front door. When greed builds a kingdom, it always forgets the one thing it can't own: love. And love was the only thing that survived. 6 months later, Margaret stands in a bright, renovated office. The company's new logo reads Langford & Co., a new legacy. Employees greet her with smiles and respect. She walks through the halls confidently, a soft hand resting on her baby bump. Justice doesn't always come from courts or revenge. Sometimes, it comes from simply standing tall when everyone expects you to fall. She looks out the window at the city skyline, her reflection merging with the sunlight. Margaret softly. He thought he could define legacy by blood. But legacy is built by love, and by strength. She turns away, a gentle smile forming as her phone buzzes with a message from Chandra. Joseph filed for grandparent rights. Case dismissed. Margaret chuckles softly and whispers, "Margaret, some lessons take longer to learn." She walks into the nursery next door. The room is complete now, painted in warm colors filled with soft light. She runs her hand over the crib and smiles. And so, the woman they tried to erase became the one who wrote the final chapter. Not in anger, but in peace. Camera lingers on her silhouette by the window. The storm has passed. Outside, the first sunlight of a new morning breaks through the clouds. Soft music plays under the hum of morning light. The camera drifts across a bright office filled with life. Workers move with purpose, laughter echoes faintly, and sunlight glows through wide glass windows bearing the new logo, Langford & Co., a new legacy. 6 months can change everything. What used to be a name built on greed was now built on heart. The people who once feared the Langford family name now took pride in it. Because this time it stood for something real. Margaret walks through the hallway, calm and radiant, a soft roundness showing beneath her elegant dress. Her hand rests gently on her belly as she reviews a document and smiles at an employee passing by. Employee grinning. "Morning, Ms. Langford. The quarterly numbers look good." "Margaret, that's what happens when people are treated like family instead of property." She signs the file, her pen gliding smoothly. The once shaky confidence is gone. Every movement now holds quiet command. Cut to Chandra entering the office, waving a folder. "Chandra, you're not gonna believe this. Joseph filed for grandparent visitation." Margaret chuckles softly, setting down her coffee. "Margaret, let me guess, the judge laughed?" "Chandra, didn't even last 5 minutes." They share a knowing look. The kind shared by survivors who've seen too much and lived to tell it. "Chandra, you've rebuilt everything, Margaret. Not just the company. Yourself." Margaret looks out the window, the city skyline glowing under the morning sun. "Margaret, he tried to destroy me by taking away what he thought mattered. Money, power, control. But none of that was ever the foundation. It was always love. That's something he'll never understand." Chandra nods, smiling. "Chandra, you did it your way." "Margaret, well, we did. And now it's time to make sure no one ever loses what we almost did." They clasp hands briefly, quiet understanding between them. Chandra leaves and Margaret walks to the window again. Narrator voiceover. The world hadn't gotten kinder. It rarely does. But Margaret had changed. She learned that real power doesn't come from inheritance or titles. It comes from survival. From choosing compassion over cruelty even when no one expects you to. Scene fades to her house later that evening. The nursery is complete now. Soft blue walls, gentle light, toys neatly arranged. She stands by the crib, gently swaying to quiet music. A framed photo of her husband sits on the dresser, his smile frozen in time. Margaret looks at it lovingly. Margaret softly. "We did it, love. The company's clean. The house is safe. Our child's future is ours again." She places a small silver locket beside the photo, engraved with their initials. Then she sits in the rocking chair, one hand resting on her belly. Sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of another. The pain, the betrayal, the loss, they don't disappear. But they become part of the armor. A reminder of how far you've come and how much stronger you are now. A gentle knock at the door. Marcus stands there holding a small box. "Marcus, I didn't mean to intrude. I just found this when we were clearing the old office. Thought you should have it." Margaret opens the box. Inside is a pocket watch, her husband's. The one he always kept on his desk. Margaret. Thank you, Marcus. Marcus. You were right about him. About all of it. Trying to do better. She nods, eyes soft. Margaret. That's all anyone can do. Start again. Marcus leaves quietly. She closes the door, turns the watch over in her hand and listens to the faint ticking. The steady rhythm feels like a heartbeat. Time doesn't heal everything. But it teaches. It rebuilds. It whispers that even after everything falls apart, life finds a way to grow again. The camera pans to the crib as Margaret places the watch beside a small stuffed bear. She looks out the window, the same one she once stood at, lost and broken. But now the light outside is warm, the storm long gone. Margaret, you'll never have to fight the battles we did. You'll grow up knowing what strength really means. She smiles, voice filled with peace. Margaret, that's your legacy now. A you one. Built on love. Built on us. Soft music swells as the camera pulls back, showing the glowing nursery bathed in sunlight. The photo of her husband and the ticking watch sit beside the crib, symbols of time, love, and rebirth. The old legacy died with greed. The new one began with grace. And this time it will last. Dedicated to those who choose love over power and peace over revenge.